Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I am one of your co-hosts. I am Dr. Joe Hamlett. And as always, I have my esteemed colleague, Dr. Dave Peltz. How are you doing today, sir?
Most excellent, sir. Most excellent. Thank you for
All
asking.
right. All right. Well, yeah, I wanted to get started off on a good note. So again, thank you all for tuning in. This is the personal, professional, and career development podcast. We want to assist you in your journeys, hence the name. If you've been here before, you know the routine. But if you've not been here, this is your first time. Thanks for joining us. As always, we'll go ahead and start the way we normally start, and that's one of us will introduce the topic, and the other one will get us going. So, for today's topic, we're going to start with recommitting. So,
Mhm.
Dr. Dave, what comes up in your mind when you think about recommitting?
We said this offline, and it's what we do every week. We recommit to
Right.
this podcast every week to
Yeah.
keep coming back and doing it. And that's the first thing that comes to mind is, commitment is not just a one and done. It's not just
Yeah.
a one time decision. It's a constant commitment or recommitment, recommitting, hence the name of the show today, um, to continue to do something. It is that
Yeah.
commitment. That is, when things get tough, when things get great, and you just want to take a break, but you got to keep going. You got to recommit so you don't
Right.
derail off of that, that success high or that
The momentum you've gained.
momentum. Yeah, the momentum you've gained. And yeah, you can celebrate, but don't celebrate too much to where you actually fall off and
Right.
stop doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
And conversely, when things are bad, you got to recommit and bring yourself back up and pull yourself back up to recommit to keep doing it, keep going forward to finish that project or process or goal to reach that goal. So that's what I initially think of when we say recommitting. It's that commitment is not just a one-time thing. You know, you
Right.
it's whether it's a marriage or relationship or school or work, you have to recommit every day to get up and to do it again and again and again and again. That's what commitment is, and that's why it's not just a one-time deal.
Right. Yeah, I like how you continue to focus on the fact that it is not a one time. We get these grand ideas or set these goals for ourselves, and it's not, we can't just do that once and then set it aside and miraculously we get there. You're right. It does take that consistent, and we've talked about this many times. It's that self reflection that,
Mhm.
what's it going to take for me to achieve this goal? And it does take, again, maybe, some people, it does take getting up every day and recommitting. Other
Mhm.
times we get that momentum, or we stay focused enough that we don't have to recommit every day, but
It's
it's in
there in
our
the back of
it
our
is
minds.
exactly, it's in our minds that we've committed to this, and we know it's a long haul, and when we are committed to getting it accomplished. The challenge is, and you brought this up or you touched on this, is when it's not going so well,
Mhm.
when things are, maybe at the low, and then you're like, is it worth doing this? Why am I doing this? You kind of maybe lose sight of where you're trying to go with this. And so
Mhm.
sometimes it does become challenging to recommit, to say, okay, I'm going to brush everything aside and continue to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, even like you said, with the successes that you start to experience, you might say, you know what, I've done this enough. I'm going to walk away from it. But at that point, again, it may be time to say, well, I know I've established this,
Mhm.
but if I want to maintain it, then I'm still going to have to commit to it, or I'm going to have to recommit to, achieving that. And I know we talked about this, touched on this offline, to earn our doctor degree. That was definitely a process where almost daily
Yeah, I
that
think it was
you
probably every hour I was recommitting.
yeah, you're recommitting to it. Well, and I've talked about this before too. The fact that I kind of shared that commit with other people, or not
Mhm.
necessarily the commitment, but
Shared
them
that
holding
goal.
me exactly, holding me accountable. So when I started thinking, oh, this is just about me, then I quickly think, oh, there's a lot of people that I've included in this with me, this journey with me. So they helped me recommit in this process. Like you said, it got to the point where some days I'd be like, yeah, multiple times saying, I got to recommit, I got to recommit, I got to
Mhm.
get this done, I got to finish. So yeah, sometimes it is pretty regularly, pretty frequently that you're
It's
recommitting to
it's almost
something.
like that contract with yourself.
Yeah,
You know, in the military, we recommit every time we reenlist or
yep,
re-up or extend our contracts. In industry, contracts are one commitment at a time for each block of time that contract is for. So we're really doing that with ourselves when we recommit. That's what we're doing, is renewing that contract, and sometimes we have to renew that contract more often with some things and not as often with others. It just depends on how appealing they are, how interested, how motivated, how much traction you have, how much you enjoy doing it. So some things like, let's say you like to draw or something like that. you know
right,
if you want to get really good, you can't just draw one stick figure and say, well, that didn't work,
right, yep,
or one smiley face, that didn't work. So, you got to recommit to say, hey, I'm going to keep trying and doing the same with sports. You have a
right,
bad day or a bad play, you have to recommit to stick with it, to keep improving and to keep going on and pressing on. And that's a good thing. And I mentioned it with a relationship, whether it's personal or professional, you know, sometimes you have to recommit a little bit more often than others, especially during the
right,
hard times and the tough
yep,
times, whether it's financial or, well-being or economic or so, in the social sides of things or the industry side of things. Sometimes you have to recommit more often than others. And the good
right,
things you tend to not have to recommit to as often because
right,
you enjoy them. And, if there's a hiccup every now and then, you can brush it off. But the things that you really want or really need to do, that can be a little bit more challenging. And so that recommitting is just bolstering up the the energy and the idea and the commitment to keep pressing forward with that self-reflection, like you mentioned, and just taking pause and thinking about it. How bad do I want this? How bad do
well,
I want this job? How bad do I want this position? How bad do I want to work for this company? How bad do I want to work for this team? How bad do I want to be in this relationship? Or how much, not how bad, how much do I want it?
right, right,
And it really makes you think, well, I may not enjoy this, but I need it to pay bills, or I need it to take, I need to do this job so I can get to the next job, or I need
right,
this contract till I can get to the next contract. So, recommitting it's a conscious effort a lot of the time. We just don't realize it because it's like a background program. It's always running. It's just
right,
how
right,
often do we check in on it?
right. Well, you mentioned or you touched on, the get to a point or where you have to make a decision. And I was at that point, again, going back to the doctoral program, I had gotten to a point where I'd been going to school for a period of time. I received some not so pleasant results from, my latest assignment.
Mhm.
And at that time, I was ready to walk away completely.
Mhm.
I had reached out to my advisor saying, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go any further because I reached that wall where I was
Mhm.
ready to walk away. And so I actually had to take a break. And I think that's where you touched on taking a break when you need to. And I had to, because if I would not have taken a break, I was probably going to make a regrettable decision by saying I'm done. And so that was instrumental in me completing my degree because I had to take a pause and I
Mhm.
had to recommit to take that time off. Again, reevaluate in my head. Okay, is it worth it? Do I want to continue this? What do I gain out of this? I had to go through that self reflection to make sure I was ready to recommit. Because if
Mhm.
I did not take that break, that pause, then I would not have finished. But I was to in addition to that, I had someone there that assisted me with telling me hey, take a break. That
Mhm.
was instrumental as well, because without that support, again, I would not be a doctor today because I was ready to hand in the towel or toss in the towel. Just I was done. So I that was a definitely a moment when I had to recommit, reevaluate, take a look at where I was and where I was trying to go. And like you said, does it still make sense? Do I still want to achieve this? Do I still want to get here? So I had to do that. And
Mhm.
so that recommitting, I was able to finish it out and with a little I think you said a little more energy, with a little more refocus, and I was able to accomplish that goal. But yeah, I was at that point where I was ready to
Mhm.
walk away. So
Yeah.
taking that break,
And sometimes you
necessarily
can't walk
break.
away, like
Right,
with if it's a job or, I'm going to use that as an example. Sometimes you just can't walk away from it. And, that's where we talk about having backup plans and, you know, reverse engineering, where you really want to be.
right,
If you don't want to be in that position or that company anymore, what are you doing to get yourself away from that situation or into a better situation or a
right,
better team or better boss or a job that you're going to enjoy even more. So there's a lot to think about when we talk about recommitting. And really, if we do that critical self-reflection exercise that we talk about so frequently, we realize that we do commit a lot
right,
over and over because you know it, I guess it's not like buying a lottery ticket and winning the lottery. You know, that's a one-time commitment. If you win the lottery big enough, you made your commitment, you played the game once, you win, hey, you're good, right? But what if you lose? What if you don't win? You have to commit to keep going back because I guess you have to play to win, right? That's what they say. I haven't got the knock on the door or that email yet. So we got to recommit to these things if we want them bad enough. If you
right.
want them, if you want something, you have to recommit to it. It's how frequently you have to recommit to it is the thing. And some things like our doctoral programs took a little bit more work.
Well, I want to go back to what you said about a job that you're at and you may not be able to leave. So that does take a little bit more recommitting,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you could recommit to that organization that you don't want to work for. At the same time, committing to,
Finding something
bettering
else. Yeah,
yourself or
exactly.
getting
So that's that
certifications or
recommitment.
education.
How
Exactly.
much do
Yeah.
you want to leave that company or leave that
Right.
position or,
Yep.
leave that team or whatever? It's
Absolutely.
what do you want and how committed to it are you? And,
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
sometimes, it's a day to day or week to week thing that you're doing this and you're committing
Right.
to it day to day, week to week to keep going back until something better happens. And that's that recommitment that we're talking
Yep.
about. And,
Yeah. It's
and
more
that
of a
recommit,
it's more of a means to an end,
yeah. And then
versus
that
again.
recommit and that recommitment daily, looking for another position or for another company or, reaching out into your network or, researching companies, that's a commitment and recommitment as well,
Right.
that you have to keep going. That's why I tell my clients, you need to front load your like the positions when you're looking for a new position, you have to really front load things. You have to have your resume in order. You have to make sure that you're up to your interviewing skills are up to speed. And then if you think, well, I want to start working at XYZ company in 3 months, well, you better start applying to that company
Right.
now,
Right.
and you should have been applying 3 months prior to that because a lot of
Right.
jobs take about 3 months on average to from the time you apply to the time you have that interview and are potentially offered a position. So you have to front load unless you're just putting in for one position and then waiting for it, which I think is kind of a silly strategy. You need to recommit to the process over and over and over again, as frustrating and as mundane as it can be sometimes when you're looking for work. It's like, well, I've applied to how many jobs and I haven't gotten an interview or I haven't gotten a call back or I've gotten the interview, but I haven't received an offer. Do you stop or do you recommit to keep going back the process and working it, reworking it, and improving that process?
Well, and I was just going to go there because you made a very good point. Recommitting doesn't mean that you just continue doing the same thing over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, but it also means taking a look at it. Maybe the process doesn't work, so
Right.
you may have to rework it, redo it.
Hmm.
But the commitment remains the same. It's
Hmm.
just how you get there. Like I say, you could do the same thing over and over and over again with no results,
Hmm.
or you could stay committed to the or recommit or stay committed to that process and just improve it, make it
Right.
better, or
Yeah.
try different things. But
Yeah.
it
Get
doesn't mean
that
that you're
feedback
not
from your
committed.
trusted mentors
Absolutely.
and coaches and your
Right.
network and say,
It,
hey, if I do this, what would you think? Or I did this and this is what happened. What are your thoughts on it?
yeah. So it's not just about, again, staying committed to that same process that,
Hmm.
like you say, may not be reaping the rewards that you want, but instead so committed to that process that you try to improve it, make it better.
Hmm.
But we talked about this recommitment thing, and maybe some of our audience are like, well, I committed once. Why do I have to
Yeah.
do that?
Why do I want to do it
Why do I have to keep
again?
doing it? And that's part of it. It's that consistency, that persistence, that discipline. That's really how you succeed. It's not just the recommitment piece, but it's all those other
Yeah.
things that
And
go
I like what you
along
said about the
with it.
discipline piece. It's like,
Absolutely.
when we were in the military, during basic training, you had to be committed to wake up every morning and do whatever it was they told you to do. Silly, frustrating, tired, whatever. You know, you could leave. Well, it wasn't that easy. I did see a
Right.
couple people walk off campus in basic training, which was just like, oh my God, are they, what's going to happen? How can they do that? But
Right.
it is that commitment piece. You've got to be committed to the process. And
Right.
yes, you may have to improve that process and look at it and evaluate it to figure out what can you do to make it better.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes it's your own attitude, really. I mean,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
your own attitude and your own perceptions of missing the mark in the past and overcoming those. And in spite of those shortcomings, you keep going,
Right.
and
Right.
that's where that recommitment piece comes in, because maybe you have fallen down when maybe you haven't thrown the perfect pass and you keep knocking your buddy in the head, right? That's not a good pass or a good
Right.
throw. But if you're committed to it enough, and so are they, eventually you're going to get it right.
Right.
So hey,
Right.
maybe you should step back a little bit further.
Right, right, yeah, yeah, and that's all part of that recommitment. You
Mhm.
said it early on. Sometimes, yeah, you go out and practice, football, and the first day you're right, you hit the receiver in the head, but then you start to evaluate, you come back the next day, and you're like, oh, you know what, I'm going to step back or I'm going to move back. So that is still part of that recommitment to achieve whatever goal you set for yourself.
Mhm.
So that it's funny to say, or kind of hard to believe that you have to recommit, but that's really what you're doing, because
Mhm.
you're staying consistent, you're doing all those things, and that's you talked about shortcomings. That's part of the whole success
Yeah.
process is the shortcomings, the failures, and then figuring out how to do it better. That's how
Mhm.
you get to that end state, is because you keep trying all those things that don't work,
Yeah.
and maybe make you come up short, but you keep applying, you keep moving forward, you keep pressing forward,
Mhm.
because you've made that commitment or recommitment to get to that end state.
Yeah.
So
One of
uh,
my professors told me, he said, when some of us were being challenged and we're frustrated with our doctoral program, well, we already know this, and we've got this down. Why do we have to keep doing it over and over? And my professor, Dr. Paul Carr, said, if you already knew it, you wouldn't be here.
right, right,
And
yeah,
that's kind of like one of those moments where you think about it. Yeah, I guess I am still learning because if I already knew this, I'd already have that degree. I'd already be teaching it or whatever, or showing someone else. So it was an interesting perspective to change our view a little bit. And I think sometimes that's what it takes.
right,
The sports analogy, I remember the first time I picked, oh, not the first time I picked up the basketball, but the first time not the first time, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Early on when I was trying to learn how to play basketball, which
right,
you know, I'd throw the ball, I'd toss the ball, and be like, oh yeah, that's going in. And it'd go up and it'd go down. And I mean, it'd just be like, it wasn't even a bounce, bounce, bounce. It wasn't even a
right,
backboard. It was just a thud when it hit because it was that bad of a shot. And it's like, if I would have stopped there, I never would have learned how to make a free throw,
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
and one of my friends, in the middle, well, several of my friends said, if you want to learn how to play basketball, Dave, you have to be able to make free throws, because free throws are what wins the game a lot of times. Those are the
Right. Yep.
separators. And and I was like, that's an interesting perspective. Again, it's that recommitment to the process. Or when you're working out or running, it's that recommitment to keep
Yep.
bicycling, keep, that extra, I did a mile today. I'm going to do a mile and an eighth or a mile and a quarter or something more
Right.
the next day. It's that recommitment or that commitment and that discipline to stay the course, like we've said so many times.
Well, no different than making New Year's resolutions that you're going to lose
Yeah.
so much weight or so many pounds of weight. And like you say, you go out there the first day and you do all this exercise and you go get on the scale and you haven't lost any weight. That's that time to recommit to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't lose any weight today,
I
but
burned this many
I've got to go
calories, but
back tomorrow.
I'm still wearing the same belt,
Right.
and
So
it's like,
I've got to go back tomorrow.
yeah,
It's that recommitment that, okay. And we said this, you said this at the very beginning. It's not a one and done. It
mhm,
is, and maybe people haven't viewed it that way, but it really is that
mhm,
recommitment to continue to do it. And it
mhm,
doesn't seem like you, and again, we said this earlier too, that it's probably in the back of your head already. So you don't have to physically say or, mentally say, I got to recommit. I got to
mhm,
recommit because that is part of that whole process. But
right,
but that's really what it is. That you are recommitting to
yeah.
whatever you said you were
And
going to
and I
do
think
initially.
athletics and entertainment, like singers and actors, I mean, those are other great examples. I mean,
Right.
if you don't get asked to come back for an audition, do you stop there? No, you recommit to keep moving forward. If you don't
Right.
hit that note, if you mess up in that song or that chord, what do? Do you stop? No, you recommit and you do it over and over and over until it becomes rote, till it becomes second knowledge, till it's like becomes part of you. It becomes innate,
Right.
and it's just part of who your being is. Like this podcast. Joe and I don't have to wake each other up every morning like we used to, knocking on each other's windows. Hey,
Right.
it's time for the podcast. What are you wearing today?
Right.
We just show up and do it every week.
Right. Yep.
We've committed to it early on. We had to recommit to it. We know our workarounds, our contingencies. So, it's just part of what we do now. And that's a great thing. That's why we love this podcast, because it is something that we're committed to, and it's something that we enjoy. And that's when you enjoy something, it's a lot easier to commit to
Oh,
something and
absolutely.
recommit to something. And versus, you know, something you don't like eating, Brussels sprouts or something like that. Although
Right.
Brussels sprouts are pretty tasty in my book.
Well, and you brought up a good point earlier when you talked about maybe having to view it differently, because you're right. It is easier to continue to do something over and over again if you enjoy it versus having to do it. So maybe visualizing it in a different way, or
Mhm,
seeing it, that it's not mundane. It's not
mhm,
something you have to do, but rather it's something you want to do. I think you said it. That makes
mhm,
a difference in achieving that goal potentially because
mhm,
you're viewing it differently than again a have to, but rather a want to.
mhm. And one of the other things along that same line is, I tell my clients, when they're struggling with doing something that they don't enjoy, I ask them, what do you enjoy? And maybe it's sports, maybe it's music, maybe it's, drawing or hiking or whatever. You know, I ask them, when you are confronted with something that you don't enjoy, that you have to recommit to, change that perspective. If you like
Right.
sports, look at it from a sports perspective, where, there's, or a competition, instead of, you know, giving into that competition and air quote losing it, you
Right.
figure out a way to overcome that challenge and win the game. Or if you're into art, how do you view things from an artistic perspective if it's not artistic?
Right.
I think sports are a great analogy for that, because there's a lot of art in sports. When you think about it, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. Like you've mentioned so many times in our other podcasts, we can give you the template on how it works, but it may not work for you. You're going to have to tweak it your own way to find your
Right.
own path.
Yep.
And that's that perspective piece. So you may have to change your attitudinal perspective on something that you don't enjoy so that you do enjoy it.
Right.
Even if it's just temporary, it may just be temporary, but that may be all you need to do to get through it. So that recommitment to figuring out how to make something work when it's not working is a big thing. It's a big step forward
Absolutely.
when you do that.
Absolutely. It definitely makes a difference.
Mhm.
So it comes easier for you to make that commitment or
Yeah.
recommit to whatever that process is.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, do you have any additional information you'd like to provide to our audience out there?
Um, be conscious about your efforts and
Yeah.
recommitting, it really is, when the times are good, it's almost a no-brainer. you're
Right.
you're
Yeah.
right, you're riding that wave, and you're just enjoying it, every moment of it. But when things are challenging, I'm not saying bad or frustrating, but challenging, be conscious about your recommitment. Why are you doing it? Who's going to benefit from this? How are you going to benefit from it? How
Right.
are others going to benefit from it? What is really motivating you? We've talked about the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation factors in the past. What's driving you to commit to this? And
Right.
find that spot again inside yourself, and recommit, and maybe it may be more often than you want, but that's part of the process.
Okay. I think you did a good job of summarizing some of the things that you can do to ensure that you're going to achieve that goal. And we kind of touched on this before. It's not that you are going to sit there and tell yourself, "I got to recommit. I recommit." But there will come a time when you may have to recommit. Like in my case, when I was ready to throw in the towel, I was ready to
Mhm.
be done. It did actually take a recommitment on my part. So I did have to go through the process of evaluating, is it worth it? Do I still want to do this? So
Mhm.
yeah, sometimes it does come to that point, and Dave said it. Sometimes when you're riding that wave or you're still really high, it's not necessarily an issue, but it's when you get down to that low point when you're still trying to figure out, do I want to do this? Is it worth
How
it?
do I make this work? What is it going to
Right.
take? Am
So
I
it,
willing
it
to do what it takes?
so again, that will be the point where you might actually have to mentally say, "Hey, need to recommit to this."
Mhm.
So uh, I'm going to end with that. And again, I think this was a very good conversation. And like I say, it's goes without being said about the recommitment, but we just wanted to touch on it, just so people are aware that also too that it is part of the process. It's,
Mhm.
it's part of you touched on earlier with the shortcomings and the failures that you may experience, still are part of that process. So with that, we want to thank you all for tuning in. Like I said, if this is your first time, thanks for joining us, and hopefully you were able to gain something from this podcast, this episode. And for those of you that continue to show up and support, thanks for your support. Again, we are the personal, professional, and career development podcast, and we just want to assist you on your journeys as well as our own journeys. We're still on our own journey. We're still, like Dave said, we have committed to this, but sometimes we have to reach back in there and say, okay, why are we doing this, and just reevaluate. So I'm glad we continue to do that. With that, if there's a topic you would like to hear about or information that you'd like us to provide, please let us know. Information is in our description. Just reach out to either one of us, and we will definitely respond as soon as possible. So, with all of that being said, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.